President Trump's controversial plans to restrict immigration include a proposal to cut funding for so-called sanctuary cities. Sanctuary cities are ones that don't arrest or detain immigrants living in the United States illegally. Philadelphia is one. Pittsburgh is considering following in Philly's footsteps. Members of the Pittsburgh City Council have proposed making Pittsburgh officially a sanctuary city, even though it already acts like one, thanks to its mayor, Bill Peduto, who joins us now. Mayor Peduto, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Explain the reasons behind your defiant response to President Trump's executive orders regarding immigration.
Well, quite simply, Pittsburgh follows the Constitution, not executive orders. The orders that the president has put out are not only illegal, but they are unconstitutional, and they've been proven in court. The federal government cannot commandeer local law enforcement. They can't put out orders to local law enforcement that they have to follow through in deporting people and become a national deportation army. This has been proven in Supreme Court decisions when Congress passed a background check that all local law enforcement would have to do for the purchase of guns. The Supreme Court argued and carried that the federal government does not have that authority. The 10th Amendment in the Constitution states that anything that is not a power of the federal government is given to the states. A president can't expand the powers of the Constitution. No president can. These orders that they would try to do are very reminiscent of some of the provisions of the Patriot Act that also got struck down by the Supreme Court. And basically the idea that they would penalize cities also has been thrown out of court before when it has been tried through Washington.
What do you see as the harm in President Trump's immigration reforms and the policies that he is advocating?
Well, the one thing is, they talk about illegal aliens. They're not illegal. They are undocumented. And being undocumented is not a criminal offense in this country. It's a civil offense. And once you're deported, if you return back, it then becomes criminal. But simply being here with an expired visa or entering this country without proper papers is not a criminal offense. So detaining people, arresting people, doing midnight raids on people for a civil offense is not American, and it's not even constitutionally viable. The bigger threat here is an expansion of federal powers to something that we haven't seen before, maybe something that's been attempted, but to being able to require local law enforcement to follow the authority and the job of customs and immigration officials is not something this country was founded on. In fact, we wouldn't even have a constitution if it were. The 10th Amendment was what pulled all those states together because it told the states that unless the power is put in the Constitution, you have the ability to govern yourself. And the Constitution would never have been ratified without it. And what President Trump's order does is strikes away that important part of a republic of states that we are and tries to create this national model with a national police force.
This is an issue that is very personal for you. Explain why that is.
Well, there's a couple of reasons. I mean, I've had the opportunity to see Pittsburgh change, and the new immigrants that are coming here really redefining who this city is. In particular, the Latino community and the Muslim community that is being marginalized. But before it was those communities, it was the Italians, it was the Greeks, the Slovaks, the Poles. It was the Eastern Europeans and the Southern Europeans who came here and built America. My grandfather came over in 1921, settled in Carnegie. He was welcomed by the Ku Klux Klan that had a march down Main Street. And then in 1924, Congress changed the laws, and they said that we welcome everyone as long as you were here in 1890. And they made America look like it looked in 1890. The percentage of Italians, the percentage of Poles, Slovaks, Ukrainians. And that meant that my grandmother couldn't be with her husband until 1927. She had her son, who my grandfather wasn't with for 5 years of his life. And we made the mistake once, so I want to make sure we don't make that mistake twice.
Pittsburgh has adopted policies and practices that are consistent with those of sanctuary cities. What led you to do this?
We started in 2014, long before Trump was president, Obama was president at the time, and we really were following up on provisions that we took back when the Patriot Act was passed. This was over 200 cities that said certain provisions of the Patriot Act are unconstitutional. You cannot do these things, and that held up in Supreme Court. So we wanted to make sure that we had a clear, welcoming city, that people understood that our local law enforcement would not be working with ICE officials, the Immigration and Custom Enforcement, unless there was a warrant. So if there is a warrant for a criminal act, we'll participate, because no matter where you're from in the world, if you've committed a criminal act, that you need to be able to face the court system. But simply being here undocumented is not a criminal act, and our officers will not participate.
What you did in 2014 was very prescient. Did you have a sense of what was coming, of where things were headed with immigration and just the what many see as paranoia being felt by some citizens, and certainly the federal government and the White House?
I think we've certainly felt that throughout this country ever since 9/11, and in particular to the Muslim community, where sort of everyone is viewed as the bad guy, and obviously that couldn't be further from the truth. So we wanted to make sure that that was part of a welcoming city, that we were playing offense in trying to make people feel more welcome. With the Latino community, we've seen it for decades. We've seen it without proper immigration reform being passed that would stand to the test of time of the words on the Statue of Liberty, of that we were always welcoming. When my grandfather came over and they said, well, they came over legally, you just had to survive a boat ride and prove you didn't have whooping cough. I mean, there was very little limits. We just had an open port system. You got on a boat in Italy without visas or anything and just came over, and we said, welcome. Now we're putting all these rules in place because people look different. And it has always been one group or another, and it has always failed. I think if there's any silver lining in all this is, we have gone through this time and time again, and every time that some leadership has tried to tell people we're pulling the ladder up, it's always failed.
Philadelphia canceled its Cinco de Mayo celebration for 2017. The concern among many in that community, many Mexican Americans, or even those who are here as undocumented immigrants, was that if they come out of the shadows and participate in this big city party, that some will be arrested or deported. There is that fear that people are living in now. Pittsburgh doesn't have the Mexican community that Philadelphia has, but we have other ethnicities in this city that have their own celebrations that all of the citizens of the city like to participate in. How concerned are you that people will be afraid to do these kinds of things and be themselves in the open because of the fear of what might happen?
Even though Pittsburgh's population is stagnant, our Latino community is growing at a very high rate, and that's really where our future will be. I have heard firsthand stories of parents not sending their children to school, people not going to work, people living basically day by day in fear of what may happen, not willing to call 911 for any type of service, whether it's a medical emergency, a fire, or if they witness a crime. That doesn't make a community safer. That makes the community much less safe. And having people in America having to live under fear for what is a potential civil offense is not really the type of America that I think people can be proud of.
So what has to happen? What is going to change the direction that things have been going in?
I think it's going to have to happen through the court system. I think, number one, that cities, and this is something that Democrat and Republican mayors all agree about, cities are going to have to be the ones that stand up and say, this is not only morally wrong, but it's unconstitutional. We need to be able to show that the federal government or a president's executive order does not trump the Constitution, that the Constitution is very clear on what the powers of the federal government are and what authority is left to the states. And they cannot then dictate expanded powers onto local government. Number two, we have to prove and go to court again that they don't have the power to take away funding simply because local government is following the Constitution. And in fact, it has been proven in courts before that that is nothing more than coercion, trying to demand policies that you don't have power over by using the purse.
I.e. that if Pittsburgh were to officially become a sanctuary city, that there's then that threat that funding will be taken away by the federal government.
Correct. There's a term in law called germane. Is it germane? Can you say that not following immigration policy dictated by an executive order will take away your funding for education or roads? No. Can it take away your funding for the COPS program that adds additional police? Potentially. But you can't just throw a threat over local government and say, we're taking away all your funding unless you agree with us about this. It is in the courts considered coercion. And I think that those two decisions coming out of the courts will be the same as the Muslim ban and will be the same as other decisions down the road. That although this president promised these things during the campaign, they're unconstitutional and non-defensible and immoral.
How much of this is an extension of the vindictiveness that has become evident in the personality of the president? That if you cross me, if you do something I don't like, I'm going to figure out a way to get back at you, even though it might, in the view of some, be unethical.
I think that it's an attempt by this administration to try to find ways to be able to have a vindictiveness. However, our founding fathers created checks and balances that prohibit anybody from being in that office of having dictatorial powers. As they try to do this, they hit the brick wall each time of the U.S. Constitution. The United States Constitution doesn't permit what you're trying to do. And I think it's really keys up what Ben Franklin said, one of our founding fathers. It was a quote that's, anybody who would sacrifice essential liberty for temporary safety deserves neither. And we've hit this challenge many times in our history. And each time that somebody tries to mandate these types of laws, they fail.
I think you probably explained this pretty well earlier in our conversation, but in the interest of presenting the contrarian point of view, there are those that say it's not fair to immigrants who followed the rules and came into the country legally to allow illegal immigrants to enjoy the same benefits.
Yeah. So the rules of immigration are not carved in stone. The rules of immigration go with the whims of Congress. They go with the whims of populist opinion. And mainly they go with the trends of an economy. When an economy is slow, the rules of immigration tend to rise. When a lot of influx of new people come, the rules of immigration get harder. For so many families, especially those whose families came here before 1924, the rules of immigration were give us your huddled masses. That was the rule. It didn't. You didn't have to fill out paperwork. You just got onto a boat, you crossed an ocean, and you were given an American flag, and you were said you're an American.
That was seen as part of America's mission, the reason why this country exists, to provide that safe harbor for people.
We were viewed as being that safe harbor for the world, of being this country that accepted all, of being the melting pot, of being the ones that were the ones that accepted the refugees from anywhere for any reason. In 1924, we changed those rules because too many Catholics, too many Eastern Europeans, too many Southern Europeans were coming here. In 1930s, we went even a step further as refugees in boats came crossing over, trying to escape hell. We told them to turn around, and 6 million died. What type of history do you want to live in during your time in America? The history that's been proven wrong time and time again, or that which has stood up to be that beacon on that Statue of Liberty, to defends the Constitution and the constitutional rights of individuals, of protecting the patriots who are the new immigrants who are coming here that will be the future of this country.
A very powerful argument that you put forward there. For those who are less emotional than folks like we are about this, who look at it from a practical standpoint, talk about the economic, as a mayor of a major American city, talk about the economic impact that immigrants have. That if you take that away, how does that affect the economy of a city like Pittsburgh, for example?
Well, this country would never have been the power of a global basis that it was without the immigrants who came over during the Industrial Revolution. We would probably be an agrarian society. We would potentially have a GDP slightly above Canada, but we would never have been able to build this country in the world without those that worked in the mines, in the factories, and in the mills, and those that came and used their backs and their shoulders and built a global economy. Today, there are people coming from all over the world coming back to Pittsburgh, but they're not working in a factory or a mine or a mill. They're working at hospitals. They're working at research. They're working in technology. They're changing globally the economy once again. And they're coming and they're using their minds. And they're bringing their family with them so that they have community. And they're bringing their neighbors with them so that they build out neighborhoods. The economics of this are multiple, and they hit across several different lines. They not only help to watch our economy grow and Pittsburgh to become a global leader once again in technology, in medicine, in robotics, but it also helps to watch neighborhoods become reborn as families move into them and those neighborhoods come back again.
Pittsburgh Mayor Bill Peduto has been our guest. Mayor Peduto, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.